So he said, these are for the museum in the future. I suppose everything is lost already, but anyhow, that was a nice joke. Now I would like to say a few words about language and about emotions. If we ask ourselves about language from the perspective of this explanatory path, we ask, what is language? We are listening for an answer in the domain of objectivity. For example, we may be told, or we may be given the answer, language is a system of symbolic communication about what is. And that entails symbolization as a given ability. It's a system of symbolic communication. So the question indeed is not accepted. You get a description of what you can do with language, but you do not get a generative mechanism of language. But if you ask the question in this other explanatory domain, you immediately know that what you want is a reference, a pointing or a description of a process which, if it takes place, you are going to find that you say, ha-ha, languaging is taking place. So the difference is, here, what I get is a property in the background, for example, symbolization. And here, what I'm looking for is for a generative mechanism, for a process which, if it operates, what I shall get is languaging. Similar of what we did in the morning about cognition. When we ask about cognition, and then we reflect upon what we do to claim cognition, we discover a process that constitutes knowing. Now, can one answer this question about language in these terms? Yes, I think that one can answer it. And for that, what one has to do is to look under the circumstances under which one would speak about languaging. In a manner that tends to be satisfactory in relation to what we do as human beings when we claim that we language. Notice that I don't speak about talking to separate this from mere production of sounds, but there is something in the background that what we do through the sounds that constitutes what we understand language as language. Because sometimes we have sounds, signs, movements. What is it that we must take place so that we can speak about languaging? Well, what I think that must take place, and I shall say first what I think that must take place, is a coordination of coordinations of actions, a coordination of coordinations of behaviors. That a mere coordination of behavior is not languaging. That there is something peculiar that happens when you have coordination of behavior and coordination of the coordination of behavior. Let me give you some examples. One example is a situation of modern human life. I give you two examples of modern human life. Suppose that you are detectives, private detectives, and you have accepted the commission of investigating some person for a divorce suit. What do you do? Well, you do several things. First of all, you ask for an advancement of what you are going to be paid, so that you buy yourself a special coat, dark glasses, a hat, so that you can indeed go out in disguise, so that nobody recognizes you as a detective, and begin to follow one of the parties. But you must follow this person at certain distance, because what you are looking for is for a situation in which you can claim that infidelity is taking place, because this is a divorce process. And so you may find yourself in the following situation. Here you are, behind a tree, looking with your special glasses, completely in disguise, to this gentleman that is going in the park, and to this lady that is coming in the same direction. Let us suppose that it is the gentleman that you are following, and you want to know whether this other person is the partner in this particular situation that you are investigating. You look and you see them crossing, perhaps a gesture of gentilesse, and then pass each other. How do you know that there has been languaging between them? You were far away, you could not listen. How do you know? Because you are looking for a very special situation, for something that you can use for a divorce. You look for the consequences, for what comes afterward. You say, these two persons cross in the park. But if indeed these are a couple, that means that maybe they agree on meeting in some place. But how do you know that they agree? You say, this is a small town, the best hotel for a private meeting is such and such. What I'm going to do is to go immediately to that hotel and look at the entrance. And so you go fast, you run, and you begin to watch the entrance of the hotel, and you see the gentleman, and then you see the lady, and you say, they agree to get together in the hotel. But notice that what you have done is to claim that there was something that you would recognize as languaging. What you were looking was for some agreement. And that is an agreement only if the first encounter constituted the possibility for a second encounter. Is at the encounter they coordinated themselves, and in coordinating themselves they coordinated their coordination, which is the second encounter. Now, this is an entirely different thing as two animals or two persons crossing each other, making some gesture of recognition or not, and going away. In that particular case, if it did take place, what you have is a coordination of behavior. Which we describe as an agreement. As a sort of appointment. An appointment is an agreement which is coordinates, two persons coordinate, and they coordinate the coordination in what is the posterior meeting. Let me present you another case. You come out here to an avenue, you want to take a taxi, and the taxis that go in the direction in which you want to go are all taken because of the time of the day. But those which go in the other direction are not taken. What do? You do the following. Oh my goodness, did not see me. There is an encounter of sights. There is a coordination, and then you do the following. And the taxi goes around and comes and stops near you. There you have a coordination of behavior. You coordinate your behavior with the person driving the car, and then you coordinate your coordination with the person that drives the car. I say that when this sort of thing happens, you have the phenomenon of languaging. Notice that the coordination of the coordination constitutes the agreement or constitutes the commitment for carrying. My wife one day was carrying bags and saw a car, a black car, and said, please. And the car stopped, and she opened the door, got inside and said, such and such a place. She gave the address. She was driven. She came to the place where she was going and said, how much do I owe you? And the gentleman said, but I'm not a taxi driver, madam. But it's beautiful, isn't it? Because the taxi driver was constituted in the coordination of actions. She was taken where she was going in a coordinations of actions. Operationally, she was in a taxi. In the domain of declaration, she was not, because the man was not a taxi driver. So, what I'm claiming is the following. Coordinations of actions constitute the phenomenon of languaging. At the same time, the coordinations of actions constitute the objects on which languaging is taking place. The taxi is constituted in the coordination of coordination. The person is coordinating, and then the next coordination constitutes the carrying, and hence the taxi or taxiing.
When is it called languaging? The first time?
No, when you have coordinations of actions, it's not called language. I'm saying that is the phenomenon of languaging. At the same time, I'm saying that which we do in language is precisely coordinations of actions or of behaviors. And I am also saying that objects arise as coordinations of actions that obscure the actions that they coordinate. Because
at the end.
Yeah, at the end. You see, because in the second coordination, which constitutes the carrying and which constitutes the taxi, obscures the coordination that constituted it. You end with something that seems to be an entity which indeed is constituted in a process of coordinations.
Can you give an example with a baby, like a mother and a child? Is to give an example where there isn't language in one part?
I shall give you an example not with a baby but with a dog, which is an actual case. I have a dog, and my dog has the very original name of Wolf. I mean, there are hundreds of dogs called Wolf. This call is not really Wolf, it's called Lobo, which is the same thing. So I go out with my dog, and I realized that this was happening afterwards. I did not intend this to happen. Just suddenly I discovered that this was happening. And what I'm going to tell is very possible something that many of you have experienced with your domestic animal, with dogs. Not with cats so much, but with dogs, yes. I go out, we are walking, he is in front of me, and we come to an intersection. There is this street, we are going in this direction, the dog is there, I am here, and I want to go in that direction. So I said, Lobo. The dog stops, look at me, and I do the following gesture. And so he turns around and goes that way, and I go this way too, and stops and looks at me, and we go this way. There you have a coordination of behavior. I say, Lobo stops and looks at me. This is a coordination between the dog and me. And then with this gesture, we coordinate our being coordinated. Because what comes afterwards is special in relation to the previous coordination in which we were. I say, there, the dog and I participated in a minimal operation of languaging. Now, in the mother and the baby happens exactly like that. What the baby and the mother do as the baby learns to speak is to participate in coordinations of actions and then coordinations of actions. Now, human brains pertain to a history of evolution of languaging. So we do this very easily. As development is taking place, the child reaches a certain age and this explodes. In 2 years, 3 years, a child speaks perfectly. And perfectly means speaks is in language with you, with an enriching vocabulary and growing delicacy in the use of the grammar and so on and so forth. But what has taken place is that the domain of coordinations of behavior is enriched. You don't get this easily with just any animal. If you want a dog to go there and you point with your hand, the usual thing is that the dog would orient to your hand, not there. You require a training of the dog. That means you require a history of living together with the dog such that this gesture is pointing. What I'm saying then is, as two organisms live together in recurrent interactions, what the observer sees is behavior and coordinations of behavior. Because there are recurrent interactions. If there are no recurrent interactions, there are no possibility of coordinations of behavior. Now, there is the possibility that in some moment what you get is not mere coordination of behavior, but coordination of coordinations of behavior. And when that happens, you have a new phenomenal domain. It's like passing from addition to multiplication. You add, you get certain operations, you perform an operation, things grow in a certain way. Then you invent multiplication, and the whole thing explodes. There are completely a mushroom of new numbers that can appear in a different manner than how they appear by just addition. Now, multiplication is an addition. Yes, it's a system of addition, but the operation of multiplication is not a mere addition. It's an addition of a certain kind. The same case here. You have coordinations of behavior, and in being together, some moment takes place in which you have a coordination of behavior, and then you have an explosion because you have a mushroom of behaviors that coordinate with each other in living together. Yes?
Does the negative also apply that when you have some kind of a behavior that is not coordinating a coordination, then you could say, well, language is not taking place. And I have in mind the kind of behavior like you might have someone reciting poetry to themselves or singing a song, where presumably they're doing it where there are some aesthetic reasons or underpinnings for their languaging. I'm defining reciting poetry or singing a song as a form of languaging, and yet there doesn't appear to be any coordination.
Yeah, well, two things. On the one hand, of course, we already exist in language now. So we're immersed in this. So if I am writing a song even for myself, this is taking place already in language. And I shall say a few things about that later on. But we recognize the interference or the lack of coordination by saying there is no communication. You speak to someone, and then you say something else which should result in a coordination in terms of what you have said, and doesn't happen, you say, well, we are not communicating. What happens is that we are not communicating. But I'm not speaking about communication. Communication is a reflection about the flow of the coordinations of actions. or of behavior.
So another way to think about it is like ringing someone up on the phone. When the phone rings and they pick up the phone, that's the first coordination. When you start talking, then you're coordinating again.
For example, you ring, you pick up the phone, and you hear, "Is you John?" But wow. Oh my goodness, it was the dog. Yes, John.
So that's the first coordination.
Yeah.
And then you start.
And then, now, these coordinations of coordinations are consensual. Now, consensuality, we said the other day that I was distinguishing between consensuality and agreement. Consensuality, agreement. In agreement, we need language, because the agreement is the explicit statement of a coincidence to take place. Explicit statement of a coincidence of action to take place. David was speaking here, and it was apparent that he was asking for the possibility of an agreement. There was not explicit statement about an agreement in that direction. There was the suggestion of a possibility of an agreement for some other thing, but there was not something that we could say, oh, we agree to do that and that. There was no explicit statement about a coincidence of actions. But at the same time, somebody said, well, it may be that we shall call each other was a reflection about the possibility that a certain consensus could have taken place in which certain coordinations would take place just because we had been together long enough interacting with each other, so that we have certain coincidence of behavior which result not because we make them explicit, but just because we live together for a while. This is consensuality. Normally, with our domestic animals, we live in consensuality. We don't live in agreement. You pick up a cat in the street, poor little cat, you bring it home, you take care of the cat, you put the food there, you put this place where the animal is going to put his feces somewhere else, and so on and so forth. And the cat and you soon coordinate with each other. In agreement? No, in consensuality. You don't say, dear little cat, let us agree that the food will be in this corner. Do you agree? Meow. No, this doesn't happen. But you put the food here repeatedly, the other thing there, and the animal goes there, and you yourself put the food in that place, take care of this other place for cleaning, and so on and so forth. You enter into a flow of coordinations that result from living together, through changing together and living together, like the transformation of the shoe and the foot. This is consensuality. The coordinations of behavior that arise through living together prior to language are consensual. Once you are in language, you can have agreement. Because you can make, in the coordinations of behavior, explicit coordinations of behavior, but for that you need to exist already in that domain. So language is operation in a flow of coordinations of behavior consensually, or being in a flow of consensual coordinations of behavior. What I claim is that all that we do in language is the result of that. At the same time, although I shall not speak about the origin of language, by my little example with the dog, I'm showing that this is not a very special thing in human beings. This can happen with some other non-human animals as well. Now people have shown that you can do this with chimpanzees and with gorillas. But even it is not enough, you don't need to have the brain of a chimpanzee. The brain of a dog also does it. But there is one difference. We do not live in the intimacy with the dog normally to expand our domain of coordinations of behavior. But if you have a dog with whom you live in great intimacy, you may expand this domain of coordinations of behavior. And you may tell your dog, please, and go and get the papers in the door, and the ghost goes and brings out the paper. Oh, that is training. Yes, of course it's training. But some of those situations are coordinations of behavior.
It seemed to me somewhat significant. When you were
Somewhat
significant. When you were talking about pointing in the chicken language with the dog, you really pointed. You didn't just point. You really pointed. And there was something in that was the way it involved you over time and in a manner of being.
Yeah.
Something else could have worked.
Yeah, but you see the pointing, but the dog does not necessarily see the pointing.
What did you really, he wasn't that you just pointed. To me, you could just say,
Yeah, because I was emphasizing this. But I can do this, I can emphasize it. Please go there, and still the dog doesn't go. I was mimicking pointing because I was not pointing to anything special, I was mimicking pointing. Yeah.
It seemed to me that would be the way you would begin the language by moving in that sort of way.
Well, I don't think so. But maybe that you will be doing this too. You will say, you point there, look, come. This is what I want. Put it in the mouth. Bring with me. Yeah. Thank you very much. Then you put it there again and say, go there. And the dog looks at me. Whoa, whoa. Go there. Whoa, whoa. Come. Pick it up. And that will be a training which will result in that when you say, go there, the dog will go there. But you say, for example, Wolf comes. Go and get my paper. And there you have coordination of coordination. Because Wolf is a consensual coordination with the dog. The name is a consensual coordination with an animal or with a person.
So Maturana, if you do stimulus response training with an animal, whatever it be, if that does result in coordination with the animal, then you can say that yes, you have a language.
That you do an operation in language, yes. Sometimes we may not like very much, for example, say, so stimulus response could lead to that. Do you mean that it's only stimulus response? Oh, and one may have some misgivings about the stimulus response story because there is lots of things written. But what I'm saying is, let us forget our misgivings about history and let us see at the operation, which is the operation that constitutes the phenomenon. Under certain circumstances will be describable in terms of stimulus response. But if what you get is consensual coordination of consensual coordinations of actions, then you get this basic operation that constitutes language. Well, the same thing happens with the baby and the mother, but you don't look at it in terms of stimulus response. And this is what must have happened in the history of humanity. I shall not speak today about that.
But if you have a human interacting with a plant, it can be shown that some plants grow better if they're played music or spoken to or something like that. There you have a coordination of actions, and there is a consequential coordination of actions.
Is there?
It's a question, I suppose.
It's a question. Is there? Well, you see, if I take metallic sodium and put it into water, and I have a certain chemical reaction, can I describe this in terms of coordinations between the sodium atoms and the water molecules? In a way, I could force the situation to describe in those terms. But am I speaking about entities that conserve their identity in the process? Suppose that what I do is to play music to the plant, and through these certain vibrations take place in the trunk that facilitate the flow of the sap. And so the plant grows better. Is the same thing? I would say it's not. So one has to be very careful to look at what is the phenomenon that is taking place. What are the processes being involved? By this, I'm not denying, I'm not saying, look, you cannot have coordinations of actions with the plant. Maybe the temporality is completely different, we don't see it. If you have a plant grows like a vine, sticking around something, and you put a stick and it grows around it, well, in a way, you are getting a coordination of actions or a coordination of behavior in the plant with you, with a temporality such that you may have another coordination, but the next coordination is a coordination of the previous one. You have coordination of, or you have coordination and. We frequently have coordination and coordination and coordination of behavior. Now I'm speaking about coordination of behavior. At the same time, the fact that I and my dog have occasional coordinations of behavior, although that is an operation in language, does not constitute a situation in which the dog and I live in language. So occasional phenomena do not define the identity of the system. We human beings live in languaging. I and my dog have occasional operations in language.
And that's what distinguishes human beings from other
That is what
beings.
distinguishes human beings from other animals that do not live in it, although they occasionally may have coordinations of action. In what sense that difference is fundamental? In the sense of what is being conserved. We human beings are a kind of animals in which the manner of living that is being conserved generation after generation is that one in which languaging takes place all the time.
I just think when A is coordinating its behaviour with B, and languaging evolves out of consensual coordination of that behaviour, I was thinking, what is thinking? And it occurred to me that maybe thinking could be said to be when A is actually coordinating its behaviour with itself.
That is a possibility. Certainly in the moment in which you are in language,
Yes.
the possibility of observing appears, objects appear, and hence the possibility of treating oneself as an object of distinction appears, and self-observation may appear. Yes?
What are you seeking to explain by giving this definition of language? Because we all know what language is. It's something like we all... When you say
No, we do not know all what this language is. We all operate in language with great facility.
Yes, we're all dwelling in it. As you
Yes.
say, we live in language.
Yes.
So we live in it. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm participating in an active moment of language. At other times, like I say, I'm in a passive moment of language when I'm listening to you. So we're all aware at an existential level of the presence of languaging.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering why, when we're trying to define language in terms of coordination, that's a very kind of a alter the kind of behaviourist way of saying, well, that something is going on within a subject where we don't want to acknowledge that there's some kind of subjective thing happening, where we try and define it in objective terms, what is essentially a subjective experience.
Yeah, no, it's not that what I want to speak, because I'm not speaking about the subjective experience. But perhaps I should have said at the very beginning the following. It turns out that I'm a biologist, and I'm a scientist, and I have this question: how come that language ever arose in the lineage to which we belong? How can I answer that question? To answer that question, I must be able to say what began when it began, comparable to the question that the student asked me, Doctor, what began 3,500 million years ago when life began, when you say, if life began when you say that life began, what did begin then? What did begin in the history of humanity when language began? What I'm saying, what began was coordinations of actions or of behavior, not as episodic phenomena, but as a manner of living. Now, why this is of any relevance? Oh, because if we understand this, we can understand what we do when we are in language, what observing is as a phenomenon, what is self-consciousness as a phenomenon. After all, we are accepting that we can explain, or we want to explain, observing. Of course, we can operate in it without reflecting upon it. But if I ask someone, what do you do when you observe? You can tell, well, I look something that is there. Well, but you cannot distinguish between perception and illusion. What do you do when you observe? Oh my goodness. The situation becomes a little bit more complicated. I need to know more about what is happening to answer the question, what do we do when we do observing, when we are, even though we are systems that are structure determined systems and cannot distinguish between perception and illusion. And what is happening here, if we follow this, is that as coordinations of behavior take place in living together, a domain of operation in the relations between A and B appears that becomes a world. And as it is more enriched, it becomes the world that this particular kind of beings live. In this particular case, us. In which observer, as coordinations of behavior take place, A and B become capable of operating as observers. The operation that constitutes observing takes place in language, in the sense that as you coordinate your coordinations of your coordination of your coordinations, then you are doing exactly what you do when you say, this is a cup. I'm observing the cup. I tell you, I'm observing the cup. I'm making a distinction, and then I'm distinguishing myself and making a distinction of this relation between myself and that which I'm distinguishing. And to do that, I need this operation. You could also speak about these coordinations of distinctions. Distinctions of distinctions. It's a recursion in this operation of coordination between this living being. Distinctions of distinctions. When I distinguish a cup, I point to the cup. When I point to my pointing of the cup, I am distinguishing my distinction of the cup, and I am an observer. But for that to happen, I must live with somebody else. And that is the answer to solipsism, by the way. That language as a phenomenon requires at least two. Yes?
Just a little unclear of the distinction between a coordination and a coordination of a coordination. and particularly with regard to a greeting. You mentioned those two people, a man and a woman walking in the park, and they exchanged something. Something was communicated between them. It's not clear to me that that doesn't involve language.
No, in a greeting, yes. In a greeting involves languaging. But as a detective, I don't only want a greeting. This was a special case with the detective. If I see this gentleman saying, touching the hat, saying hello to this lady, this doesn't tell anything else.
So it's from the viewpoint of the detective?
Yes, yes. Or it's languaging, but it's not that operation that he was interested. So I said, maybe they may gesture to each other, but this is not what I want.
So it's applied to that specific purpose?
Yes, but the specific purpose of the detective. But at the same time, that allows me to trim out this particular situation. They recognize each other, they acknowledge each other, they do something such that they are not separated anymore in the long run. They look at each other and they know. You see, all these expressions, of course, we make already in language, so it has a richness that obscures the minimal situation that I want to see. But they look at each other, and we know, as observers, that they know each other. And then they make a gesture, and as a result of this gesture, we say, let us look at the entrance of the hotel, and we see them getting together. But let me tell you a case of that very same kind with baboons. Now, the baboons are monkeys, quadrupedal monkeys that live in the savannah. And some of them, some species, live in small harems. There is a male with several females. Now, sociobiologists think that this is a fantastic arrangement for the male to secure that all his genes go in the descendants, because, in many descendants, because this male controls the behavior of several females, and the sexuality of these several females so secures that his genes go in the descendants of 3 or 4 females. And this is the description that anthropologists have made. But a particular anthropologist, a woman, asks herself, what happens with the females? Maybe something happens with the females. And so she went to study these baboons, observing the females. And she noticed a very peculiar situation. Now, when you have this little harem, there are males which are peripheral males that do not have harem. Those males supposedly have no copulation with females because the sexuality of this female is completely controlled by this male. But she observed something very strange. She observed occasionally what she called a peculiar look between a female and a peripheral male. And this was a very uncanny look because she knew this look. She knew this look. This was not just a crossing of eyes. So she began observing the behavior of this female and this male. And so whenever this particular look took place, the female moved, wander, the male wander, and they got together somewhere in the bush and copulated. And the result is that less than 30 or 40% of the genes of the dominant male pass to the descendants, because all the rest come from peripheral males that have this beautiful interaction with the females. But there you have a coordination of coordinations of actions, which are of the same kind as this gentleman crossing this lady and then meeting in the hotel. And I'm not inventing this. This is, in fact, an observation done with these animals. Now, these baboons do not live in language. And yet, that is an operation in language, a coordination of coordinations of action. This male and this female connect with each other, and then they do something in relation to their coordination.
I was just passing thought. the way in which they explain what they experience. But,
Well,
that later.
yeah. Maybe we talk about that a little bit next week.
Is the special look an agreement? Does it constitute?
Not immediately, but the flow of what happens through this constitutes the agreement. No particular coordination is the agreement. It's the coordination of coordination that constitutes the agreement. Or that constitutes the special thing that we shall see as something like an agreement. Because this, of course, already takes place in full language. We make it explicit. But the equivalent to and coinciding through them of getting together somewhere else.
But this is a high level of consensuality.
Yeah, because it's a consensuality of consensuality. Precisely, it's a high level. It's consensus about the consensus. We connect with each other, and now we coordinate our connection with each other. And that doesn't always happen. But when it happens, what you have is this peculiar thing that we do in language. But better, that constitutes languaging. Now, we do it all the time. I mean, all we would have been doing now here together, even though apparently you have been in silence, because you have not been talking, is a continuous flow of flowing in coordinations of consensual coordinations of consensual coordinations. I shall say a few things about the nervous system to show how can this happen in our solitude. But what is involved is a manner of living in this. Now, if this begins occasionally and remains occasional phenomenon, it's just like that, occasions in languaging. Small vignettes. But when this becomes the manner of living, then of course becomes more and more involved. And the history of evolutionary transformation can take place if that is conserved as a manner of living. And this is here where the point of conservation of a particular relation or dynamics of relation appears as important, because it's the same kind of phenomenon. Conserve recurrent interactions, conserve a certain relation with the medium, and the whole system changes around that. Nothing is silly to ask.
Would it be reasonable to ask then if, to define the word coordination, is it as simple as interaction between two of them?
No, it is the observer who says that there is coordination because, for example, let us suppose the following thing. I go through the street and somebody passes and touches me and I go on. That was an interaction. It hurt me a little bit. There was no coordination. But if touches and say, excuse me, and the other person says, don't worry, then you have something else.
Then what is the distinction there? I can see the distinction. But what is it that makes that?
The distinction is that the behavior of A has certain consequences on the behavior of B, triggers some behavior of B, and B does something in relation to C or to A that has to do with this encounter.
Let's go backwards and forward. The fact that you
Yeah.
just rubbed your arm the first time meant that nothing was communicated back, unless you intended them to see you do it.
Exactly. But if I say, for example, let us suppose this person is coming and there is a pool and I stop and the other hurries and then I go. There you have had a coordination of behavior between these two persons. Because as I diminish my speed, the other hurried and I could go. So he hurried because I stopped. So there we coordinated our behavior. But there was not necessarily a coordination of a coordination. In courtship, for example, instinctive courtship, two animals, flies. The female fly stands in a certain way, the male in front vibrates the wings, and the female vibrates the wing, and so the male comes to the side, and so on. And certain things, certain behavior path of behavior takes place in which one does one thing, the other does another thing, and then and so on and so forth, and this may end in copulation. This is instinctive, but you have there a flow of coordinations of behavior which is instinctive. Doesn't arise in the living together. So this business of coordinations of behavior is very frequent among living organisms, with the cat. What is not so frequent is coordinations of coordinations, and which is less frequent is to live immersed in coordinations of consensuality, of consensual behavior. Now, does this mean that we are the only animals that live in coordinations of behavior? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Maybe dolphins do. Maybe chimpanzees in the wild do some coordinations of behavior. But we are a particular kind of animals that belong to a history not shorter than 3 million years to my consideration of coordinations of behavior.
Could you have a network of computers existing in a coordinating?
Yes, but only would be consensual only if it is not a matter of pre-programming. For this to happen, these entities need not be living systems, but they have to have certain characteristics about structural plasticity. Because the whole thing is happening as in recurrent interactions between two systems while they conserve their identity through the recurrent interactions, in such a way that the flow of their interactions results in coordinations of behavior which arises in the interactions. The form of the behavior is the result of interacting recurrent. Okay, so I say that is the phenomenon of language. As language arises as a phenomenon, the conditions arise for the observer to arise when certain recursion of coordinations take place. Objects arise. Self-consciousness can arise as self-distinction in relation to something else. At the same time, I'm saying, and this is a very delicate point, I'm saying that prior to language, there were not objects. Objects are constituted in language. I highlight this by saying when a cat eats a mouse, the cat does not eat the mouse. I say that the cat eats a mouse. When my watch gives the time, the watch does not give the time. The time is a relation between myself and this entity in a particular domain in which the position of the pointers of the watch hold with respect to each other certain relation in a bigger context. So although I say, what time is it? Well, my watch tells me it is so and so. This is not telling me anything, yet it is telling me the time. That means I read the time, yet the watch doesn't tell the time. The cat eats the mouse, yet the cat does not eat the mouse. Because the cat does not exist in languaging, where mouse is an entity. The clock does not exist, or the watch does not exist in the domain of interactions in which the distinction of time takes place, so it does not give the time. Oh, but I can use atomic oscillations for keeping time and have an atomic clock. Yes, Yet atomic oscillations do not give the time.
It's the same distinction between physiology and behavior.
Yeah, exactly. So there are certain phenomena that arise in the moment in which language arises. So one of these is objects, observing, self-consciousness. Does the cat watching the mouse, ready to jump upon it, observe the mouse? No. Yet does the mouse and the cat coordinate each other in a certain domain of congruence, of structural congruence? Yes. Now this is of interest because allows us to use more of exactly as you mentioned, the distinction between the behavior and physiology. There are certain phenomena that arise where certain operations arise. A world without languaging beings is entirely different from a world with languaging beings. One of the differences is that the world without languaging beings is not. Yet, once there is languaging beings, there is a world. You can even speak about the Big Bang that gave origin to the universe, extrapolating the distinction that you make now in a history. This sounds as a denial of reality here. But if we are not there, this is not a denial of reality, it's a reflection upon the domains of reality that we constitute. Notice that when we have made this reflection, reality indeed is an explanatory argument, an explanatory proposition. It's a manner of explaining experience. Here, if I am in objectivity without parentheses, I do not realize this. I speak of reality as something transcendental, independent from me. If I have made this reflection after accepting this question, I realize that whenever I speak about reality, I'm making an explanatory proposition. I'm speaking of a particular domain of explanations through experiential coherences that I distinguish, of course, in language. Explanations take place in language. Explanations pertain to human relations, and human existence takes place in language.
When we think to ourselves or consciously reason, could you point out how that fits into the system? And
Yes.
Is there any alternative if we're consciously?
This diagram I call the ontological diagram of observing. And I would like to complete it because you can use it for thinking and recovering some of the things I have said. I say that this is, with respect to what I say, like the famous Einstein formula E equals mv squared. If you handle it properly, you can deduce many things from it. So before saying a few things about the nervous system, I would like to complete this diagram. And to complete it, I have to say a few things about emotions. I said that we move from one explanatory domain to the other according to how do we handle our relation with somebody else. That is according to our emotioning in our relationships. Now, what do I mean by emotioning? Let me put here in practice, this means here I want the other to do as I say. The Chilean shield of arms has some animals, a shield, and a motto. And the motto says, either by reason or force. Isn't this fantastic? Now,
New World Order.
huh?
New World Order.
No, it corresponds to a moment in history in which Chile was involved in its war of independence. So it meant we shall be independent either by reason or force. But we shall be independent disappear from the whole situation, and it only says either by reason or force. But this means something that exactly here. You do as I say, either because you accept my argument or because I force you. So interestingly enough, reason and force are not very different. Isn't that interesting? And we say, be reasonable. Be reasonable. And by saying be reasonable, we are saying do as I say. Okay, we shall come a little bit more about that. So here, we are here in this explanatory path of objectivity without parentheses, whenever in our interaction with somebody else, we want this somebody else to do as we say, claiming that we have a privileged access to how things are when we say that we are rational or objective, or disclaiming the other, even denying by force the other when we don't find an argument, but we are certain that we have a privileged access to how things are. But in this other explanatory path, we are aware that we cannot make a reference to an independent reality to validate what we say. And we realize, because we have made all these reflections, that the notion of reality is an explanatory proposition. A little bit in the terms in which Gregory Bateson speaks about an instinct. What is an instinct? An explanatory principle. Reality is an explanatory principle, an explanatory proposition. How come that this and this happens? Because of matter, because of energy, because of God, whatever it is that is the reality and is transcendental. Here, we are aware that reality is also an explanatory proposition, but we realize that there are many different explanations, each one defined as a domain of experiential coherences, hence as a domain of reality, hence as a domain of objects, hence as a domain of explanations, hence as a domain of cognition. But all of them are equally legitimate. They are not the same. They are different. But in their constitution, they are equally legitimate. Now, this does not mean, let me be clear in this. When I say they are equally legitimate, I mean they are constituted in the same manner. They are constituted as domains of experiential coherences, used to generate explanations or domains of explanations. It does not mean that they are ethically acceptable, desirable, or whatever it is. It only means they are coherent systems of explanations according to certain domain of coherences in our experience. Since they are equally legitimate, our acceptance to dwell in one or in the other, or our rejection to dwell in one or in another, is a matter of our choice. In the explanatory path of objectivity without parentheses, there is no matter of choice. The thing commands. reality commands, and its validity is universal for everybody because it is objective. In the explanatory path of objectivity in parentheses, none of these domains of reality commands. Each one is valid, and the statements in it are valid through the satisfaction of the experiential coherences that define them. So, to be in one or to operate in one or to operate in another is a matter of preference. If you ask me, why are you a biologist? And I am in objectivity without parentheses, I can say, well, because it's the most important science in existence. After all, we are a living system. This is objectively blah, 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 blah. Or science, or because it has to do with reality. Whatever it is, as an answer that claims that the validity of what I say does not depend on me. But if I am answering you in the explanatory path of objectivity in parentheses, I say, oh, because I like it. Why do you do biology? Because I like it. I like animals, I like plants, I like living things. And why do you do science? Oh, I enjoy doing science. What do you mean? You have a great time working as a scientist? Yes, I do have a great time working as a scientist. In fact, I don't work. I have such a great time that I do not work. But the difference is that here I am aware that what I do it because I want it. In the explanatory path of objectivity without parentheses, I deny that. I claim that I do what I do because its validity goes beyond me. I don't take responsibility for what I do because what I do is valid not because I choose it or I like it, but because it's transcendentally valid. A disagreement in the explanatory path of objectivity without parentheses takes place in the form of mutual denial. Two persons that disagree claiming that the other is intrinsically mistaken, that each one of them claims that he or she has a privileged access to how things are, and the other, of course, is blind, is stupid, is silly, is resistant, whatever it is. And if I deny the other, it's not my responsibility. His or her ignorance denies him or her. In the explanatory path of objectivity without parentheses, a disagreement entails the recognition, or the recognition of a disagreement entails the recognition that the two disagreeing parties are operating in different domains of reality, are making valid statements in different domains of reality. So there is no ground for mutual negation. At least there is no ground for irresponsible mutual negation. This person operates in a domain of reality that I do not like. I operate in this other domain of reality that he or she does not like. We dislike the domains of reality of the other so much that we may decide to kill each other. But we will kill each other responsibly. That means as an act of preference. Now, I speak about killing because, after all, I was living 17 years in a country in which killing for arguments was a possibility. But if I am detained and accused of being an extremist, and I am condemned to death, and I ask, which is the justification for my death? They tell me, because you are an extremist. So you are choosing to kill me? No, 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 no. I don't choose to kill you. You are an extremist. It's your misbehaving, transcendentally inadequate, that kills you. So here, we deny the other without taking responsibility. It's the mistake of the other that denies him or her. But here, let us suppose that there is a confrontation between two positions. I have been asked, does this mean that Nazism is legitimate? I would say, well, Nazism is a coherent domain of explanations, so it's a coherent domain of reality. As such, it's legitimate. But I don't want it. So I act against Nazism taking responsibility. I don't deny Nazism because it's intrinsically wrong. I deny that Nazism because I don't like a world in which Nazism prevails. So I take responsibility. Now, I think that the difference is enormous. Some people have said to me, but this is very weak. I say this is not weak at all. My life is at stake in it in every moment when I say that. And I know that this is the case, and I'm willing to accept the consequences. You see, when you do something with responsibility, that means you do something aware that you want the consequences of what you do. This is what responsibility is. I am aware which are the consequences of what I do, and I want these consequences. This is what responsibility is. So whenever you do something with responsibility, you are willing to accept the consequences. But whenever you do something without responsibility, you don't want the consequences. I mean, you do not accept the consequences of what you do. Oh, I had to kill this man because I was defending the fatherland, because he was an extremist, because of the flag. I was defending the flag, so I killed this person. I was defending justice, so I killed this person. Oh, I killed this person because I did not want the world that this person was bringing forth. That means that you have to be taken into jail and submitted to court. Yes, of course. I did it. Now, this is a very fundamental difference. To operate in objectivity in parentheses means that you are aware that there are many different domains of reality, that these many different domains of reality in their constitution are equally legitimate, that they are different, that if you prefer one or the other is indeed an act of preference, that if in a disagreement you deny the other, you do this responsibly, you do not hide on a transcendental value, but you recognize your choice and your preference. So the whole dynamics of emotioning is different. Now, what do I mean by emotioning? If I ask the question about emotions in the domain of objectivity without parentheses, I'm looking for an answer that entails a property or access to something that exists independently from me. For example, one says one has to express one's emotions. Emotions hold you. Oh, excuse me, I was carried by emotions. You speak as if emotions were something that in a way don't have to do with you. I was carried by my emotions. You have immediately generated a duality. I and my emotion took me in arms and carried me. I don't take responsibility, I was carried by my emotions. Emotion or emotioning is a property of the observer. Now, if I ask about emotions in this other explanatory domain, what I want is the operation of distinction. What do I look for to claim that there is emotioning? What are the processes that constitute that which I call emotioning? And this we can see easily. Because if we attend to what we do when we say so-and-so is depressed, so-and-so is joyful, so-and-so is angry, we shall realize that what we look is to the domain of actions in which this person or animal is. If you are a physician or a doctor, a psychiatrist or a counselor or a psychologist, and the client comes with a child that is depressed, you say to the mother, you must be careful because this child is very depressed, will not eat, may attempt suicide. You describe the domain of actions in which the child moves. If you come to the office and say, I'm going to ask for a raise in salary, and you have a friendly secretary who tells you, oh, no, not now. The chief is angry. And you know that raises in salary do not belong to the domain of actions of an angry chief. I don't want to come close to that dog because it may bite me. It's angry, it's furious. Don't worry, the dog is tranquil, will not bite you. All these are assessments of the domain of actions in which the person or the animal is. I say emotions are body dispositions that specify the domain of actions in which the animal or the person moves. Emotions are body dispositions, in fact, dynamic body dispositions that specify the domain of actions in which the person or the animal moves. I say, you want to know the emotion? Look at the actions. But I also say, do you want to know the actions? Look at the emotion. The emotions specify the kind of action that you perform. If you distinguish the kind of action, you know the emotion. In other words, the same doing, the same behavior is one kind of action or another depending on the emotion that supports it. Depending the emotion that defines the domain of actions in which it takes place. I can touch someone, and that can be a caress or an offense, depending on the domain of actions, that means on the emotion on which it is received or realized. Can one be more specific about some emotions? Yes, I shall be specific about one in particular. Love. Notice that I write it with small letters. It's nothing special. Love is the most fundamental and simple of human domains of actions. Love is the domain of those actions that constitute the other as a legitimate other in coexistence with oneself. The domain of those actions that constitute the other as a legitimate other in coexistence with oneself. You are going in the street and somebody else comes and there is water there and you wait for the other to come and then to cross and then you go around. You are performing a behavior that constitutes the other as a legitimate other in coexistence with you in the street. If you go and you just push and go and don't care, and hit the other person, you are performing a behavior that does not constitute the other as a legitimate other and coexistent with you in the street. In the first case, you act in love. In the other case, you may act in indifference or in aggression. In indifference, if you say, oh, excuse me, I did not see you. Or in aggression, if what you want indeed is pushing. I say that this is the most fundamental emotion in human life because this is the emotion that constitutes social coexistence. When we are with respect to the other in a relation of demand, in a relation in which it's not the other that interests us, but the doing of the other. So we don't treat the other as a legitimate other. What we want is an action. Under whatever cost, we operate in objectivity without parentheses. Unless the other coincides with us, and there is no disagreement. If we coincide, if he or she coincides with us, if we are both birds of the same feather, as they say, if we belong to the same community, then of course we can act with respect to each other in love because there is no disagreement. But if there is disagreement, and we demand, a demand is always a negation of the other. If you do not negate the other, you don't demand. You invite, you propose an agreement, you treat the other as a legitimate other and coexistent with you, and then you are not there, you are here. Because you accept the domain of reality in which the other operates as legitimate. Aggression is the domain of those actions that negate another, that deny another in coexistence with you. Love and aggression are not opposite, by the way. The opposite to love is indifference, the opposite to aggression is indifference. But aggression is not a fundamental emotion in human coexistence. Aggression disrupts social relations. Aggression is not a social relation. It's not an element in social relation. It's the negation of social relations. Aggression in human coexistence is episodic. When it becomes a manner of living, disrupts social relations. In objectivity, in parentheses, you operate accepting the legitimacy of the other. Doesn't mean that you accept all the dimensions of the other. Let us put here a graph. This is love. This is, let us say, in the street, acceptance in street. In the bus, you make space for the other. Here could be acquaintance in a space of work. Work relations are different, but acquaintance in a space of work. You treat the other not as a collaborator, but as a person with whom you share space. And here is what happens when you fall in love. Falling in love is entering in the passion of obtaining acceptance of the other as a legitimate other in coexistence with you in all possible dimensions of coexistence. So this expands. All possible dimensions, I want everything with this person. To live together, to eat together, to work together, to talk, to separate and yet be together again in sex, be together again in sensuality, in contemplating the moon, whatever you wish. Is this. Friendship is around here. In friendship, you accept the other practically in everything. Not in everything necessarily. Maybe there is no sexual life in friendship. But doesn't mean a denial either. You accept the other. When a friend comes with a problem, with a question, the question is always legitimate. You never object the problem or the question or the difficulty of the friend. You listen. If it's not a friend, the question of the problem may not be legitimate. But within this range of variations in dimensionality in the domain of love, you have social phenomena with more or less dimensions of coexistence in mutual acceptance. As soon as some dimensions are accepted, others can take place. There you are coming and the other person is coming, there is the pull, you stop, the other person realizes that you have stopped and smiles. Says thank you. And you say it's a pleasure. And suddenly this little acceptance of the other as a legitimate other in the street has increased in dimensionality. Maybe you even stop to talk a little bit. Who knows? I was once in New York. This is almost in the opposite direction like this, but it has to do with this. And I was taking the bus that was going to transport me from one terminal to another. And as I come in, this was in the hippie times, this must have been 1969 or something like that, 1970. The driver, that was a woman, said, "Drop that friendly smile and push." Interesting, isn't it? There I was smiling like a hippie. Drop that friendly smile and push. If you want to get in, push. Yeah, but that push, of course, is a push within a certain context of mutual acceptance in the bus. If it becomes an aggression, of course, it's a different thing. So, what I'm saying at the same time is that emotions are fundamental in human life. Of course, you all know this. But I'm saying also, not only in human life, in animal life. We have the emotions that we have because we are mammals. And some of them because among mammals we are primates. And some others because we are human beings and belong to this particular history. And because we are mammals, we understand each other so well with other animals which are mammals, with dogs, with cats. But we have certain characteristics that have to do with that. At the same time, I'm saying that emotions are not something that you have, but are dynamics aspects of your being, so you don't have to express emotions. Live them. You are in them. Be aware of them. Don't control them. If you tell the child, control your emotion, the child does not know what to do. But if you tell the tell the child, be aware of your anger, the child may say, I am not anger, and then goes thinking, yes, I am angry. He cannot escape, or she cannot escape becoming aware when he's invited to become aware without being denied in the legitimacy of whatever emotion he or she is in. If you are told, be aware that you are angry, they are not telling you, look, it's bad to be angry. We tell it's bad to be angry because in front of anger, unless we control anger, we cannot control the behavior of the other. And in the domain of objectivity without parentheses, we want to control the behavior of the other. Because when the other does not belong to our domain of reality, it's a problem. In objectivity, in parentheses, is not a problem. It's an opportunity. For what? For conversations. Very well, so emotioning enters here. Now, I shall just mention it, I shall dwell more in this in another moment. When language arises in the history of humanity, it arises braided with emotioning, because we are emotional animals in the very origin before languaging, or emotioning animals better. I call this braiding of languaging and emotioning conversation. So, conversation, braiding of languaging and emotioning. That means, as we are languaging, we flow in our emotioning. And as we flow in our emotioning, we flow in our languaging, in the following sense. We all know persons that are very extraordinary in the following manner. They have impeccable rational argumentation which seem completely contradictory in different emotional domains. This person is angry and has an impeccable argument to justify whatever or explain whatever he or she is doing. Now the same person is not angry, is serene, and has again a completely impeccable argumentation to justify whatever he or she is doing, even though it's completely contradictory to what this same person was doing in the other emotion. It's interesting, isn't it? And it's very interesting because those persons are completely incompatible, because they are impeccable in their argumentation in one case and in the other. But if we attend carefully, we realize that this argumentation stands on certain premises, accepted a priori. And this other argumentation stands on different premises, accepted a priori. And what makes these two arguments different is the premises. But we do not always realize it because it's presented as a rational argument. As our emotions change, our domains of reasoning change. Because change the fundamental premises on which we construct our rational argumentation. Because rational argumentation is an operation in experiential coherences realized in languaging, according to certain elements that are accepted to be valid. So if you change the fundamental premises which you accept as valid, your arguments change as well. But the fundamental premises are always accepted a priori, as a matter of preference. You can listen to two scientists arguing very rationally, but never coming into an agreement. You can be sure that they are arguing on different fundamental premises without them realizing that this is so. If you look to the fundaments of the argument, you will see these accept this and this as valid starting point, and these accept this and this as valid starting point, and these two starting points are different and define the difference in the argumentation, which they don't see because they treat the argumentation as being rational. And one of the things that we do, or better that we don't do, when we enter into rational argument is to look at the fundamental premises on which our argument stands. This is very frequent in political discussions, for example, in philosophical discussions, but it's also in scientific discussions. If you come to the fundamental premises, you will discover that the fundamental premises have no rational support. And if you have rational support for some fundamental premises, the system of rationality under which you give reason for these fundamental premises has fundamental premises that are non-rational. On what does depend that we accept certain premises or other premises as our fundamental premises? On our preferences. We usually I shall be seeing you. Isn't so?
Yes.
Okay.
In a week's time.
In a week's time. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Humberto Maturana.
Goodbye.
Lateral thinker joining biology and social systems.
Thank you very much.
In the most original way.
I blush. So whenever you find a disagreement between two persons, you can look at its fundaments and you will find that there are two kinds of disagreements. Logical disagreements, which are always trivial. Logical disagreements is like saying 2 by 2 equals 5. What do you mean equals 5? What constitutes a multiplication is in this way, blah, 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 so 2 by 2 equals 4. Oh my goodness, how stupid, I committed a mistake. Trivial. You don't get angry. You don't feel menace in your existence. But there is another kind of disagreement, other kind of dispute that are presented as rational, but the difference is in the fundamental premises. And those are never or usually not observed, because the disagreement or the discussion is kept in a rational, apparently in what seems to be a rational disagreement, but is in the fundamental premises, and those disagreements have no solution. And you can recognize them because they always entail anger or easily bring forth anger. Yet, if you were to look at the fundamental premises and this person were to be confronted, they might realize that they are in different domains of reality. And if they are not in objectivity without parentheses, they say, oh my goodness, let us have coffee together. Yeah, because if we are in different domains of reality, I mean, there is no problem to get angry for. We're just in different domains of reality. And maybe that by talking some more, we generate another domain of reality in which we can do things together. Okay, we human beings exist in language as this kind of phenomenon and operate, I should add here, and operate in conversations. Now, I shall add two other notions that will allow us to use this particular diagram for reflection and recovering much of what I have said. Notice that the claim that gives validity to what I have said is not objectivity. It's its participation in a domain of explanation in the answer of a question about how the abilities of the observer arise, and in a particular domain of coherence that have to do with answering the question about the biology of the observer, the languaging, and so on and so forth. I have covered much of that, but not everything that can be said. But this allows us to see that these two domains entail also two ontological domains, two domains in which we speak about the isness of whatever we are speaking about. This, I say, is the domain of transcendental ontologies, That means this is the domain in which we treat reality as transcendental. We do not treat reality as an explanatory proposition, but things are in themselves. Reality is matter, or reality is energy, or reality is consciousness, or reality is mind. And this other domain that I call domain of constitutive ontologies. Now, the ontology makes reference to the being of the thing. Ontos in Greek means being. The being of the thing, the isness of the thing, is transcendental. In this other domain, the isness of the thing is constituted in the operation of distinction of the observer. This is why I call it the domain of constitutive ontologies. Each domain of reality is a domain of constituted ontology, of isness, different kinds of isness. Now, these different domains of reality do not exist there as a possibility. We live them, and if we do not live them, they are not. Physics arises in the moment in which physics arises. Before, there is no physics. Biology arises in the moment in which that particular manner of explaining and concerns that constitute biology began, perhaps sometime with the Greeks. Before, there was no biology. If we look and construct history, we can say that, of course, human history had made so much biological distinction and such a fundamental understanding of life and living beings before. Yes, of course. But biology, as a domain of reality, begins in the moment in which appears as a domain of explanations, as a domain of reality, as a domain of biological entities. Agriculture, agriculture is much older than biology. Stoneworking, that is much older yet than agriculture. Different domain of reality. Now, each one of these domains of reality is a domain of operational coherences. I was telling to someone yesterday, I think it was, that I witnessed the following situation. Some people were making a swimming pool in their house, so they were making a hole in the ground, and they found a rock, an enormous rock. They could not remove it, they had to break it. So the people that was making the swimming pool began to hammer the rock. Impossible. There they were stuck. But the owner of the place, or the architect, I do not know who was, said, let us call some of these people that work with stones, breaking stones in the hill. A cantero is called in Spanish. I do not know how you would call this. Very humble people that only do is breaking stones. So these people came, examined the stone, tap here and there, tack, 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 and then put a piece of iron, I do not know how you call it, pack, it opened immediately. Isn't that fantastic? So for these fellows, the domain of reality of stoneworking was entirely different from the other one, because it was not in his domain of reality doing things with the stones. By this mean that these things take place in the taking place. They do not exist as some physicists speak about the multiplicity of universes. No, I'm not speaking in those terms. These domains of reality have to do with domains of explanations of human experience. That which does not appear in our domains of explanations does not exist. But may exist there, does not exist. Because existence takes place in what the observer does. Okay.
We can be in a number of domains at the same time.
Oh, yes, we can.
And the domain of biology may have a number of domains of biology.
That is true. Yeah. Yeah. But you see, the interesting thing in this is that each one of them is a domain of experiential coherences. Literature is also a domain of reality. Now, I shall finish, and either we finish or we talk a little bit more, but if you come to next weekend, I shall say more things. I shall speak about culture, the origin of our particular culture, using these notions. But by presenting this diagram, I'm presenting the whole reflection or set of reflection that I have done in these 2 days. I have told you something that I consider valid. But at the same time, I have told this to you, giving to you also the criteria that I use for considering this valid. Ideally, giving you the elements that allow you to decide whether you accept this or not through understanding what I say, not through particular other conceptions that you may have. What I say stands on one fundamental feature, which if it were not to apply, would make this invalid. And this is structural determinism. It is because we are structure-determined systems that we cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion. It is because we cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion that objectivity in parenthesis as a domain of explanation arises as a domain of understanding that we cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion. Now, I think that structural determinism cannot be negated because pertains to a manner of operation as living systems, even to a manner of dealing with our operation as living systems. So in that sense, I come here and I'm confident of the validity of what I have presented to you. If you try to find a logical mistake in what I have said, you will not find it. Now, forgive me, I mean, this sounds very arrogant, but it is not arrogance. Of course, I can commit mistake here and there, but there is no logical mistake here. I can say 2 by 2 equals 5 in some moment or another, but as a trivial thing. This, what I have presented to you, will not fail because there is logical errors. Can only fail if the fundamental element on which it stands were to be denied, and that is structural determinism. But we exist and we operate in daily life and as scientists in structural determinism. Structural determinism is not a philosophical supposition, it's an abstraction of experiential coherences. So this has to do with our life, and this is why it turns out to be relevant for us. At the same time, I present this with some pleasure because there is here an opportunity for accepting a plasticity in existence that we usually deny when we operate in objectivity without parentheses. And that plasticity in existence is very fundamental to be recognized for education and for therapy and for social coexistence. So in a sense, as I present this to you, I'm aware that this is not a mere biological or philosophical academic reflection. This has consequences in teaching. This is why I said it's completely different to say to a child, you are lazy, and saying you have not done what we agree that you would do or that we would do together. It's an entirely different thing. In one case, you freeze the child in the transcendental reality. In the other case, you recognize the plasticity of existence in your relationship with the child or with the patient. You recognize the fluidity of existence. Is this fluidity infinite? No. It takes place within the domain of structural determinism. But that we are ignorant because we do not know everything here. So, in fact, every system as it exists, although conserves certain relations which must remain invariant, exists in a domain of plasticity much larger than that which is apparent through the relations that it conserves in its existence. So I invite you to carry this home, put it under the pillow, and dream with it a little. And if you don't like it, throw it to the basket. Thank you very much.
Before you finish, or having finished, could you say something about questions, the way you'd like to handle next week on questions? And I'll say the mechanism.
Yeah. David and I had thought that some of you, many of you, perhaps, I do not know, will come next week. Now, next weekend I shall speak about culture, about the origin of our particular culture, and I shall use some of these notions of conservation, of identity, to make this reflection, and I shall use all of this. But we have thought, David and I, that perhaps you could write certain questions that you have, and that we would look at these questions and order them, not so much to answer them particularly, although I may answer some of them, but to constitute a reference for guiding my presentation. Isn't this what we thought? So if this could be done, this will be helpful for both of us. For me to fulfill my task of presenting what I want to present, and for you to guide me in the direction in which I should lead my presentation, so that it connects with what we have already done yesterday and today.
And mechanically, if you could get those to me by, say, Thursday, that would give us Friday to...
Yeah.
So if you could post, it would probably mean you'd need to post them by, say, Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest.
Have you got a fax number?
No, I don't. Is there any particular way you'd like to present it? You were saying about writing...
Oh, what I would like is that the questions be questions. Sometimes one gives an argumentation to justify the question. Don't give any argumentation. Just say, I did not understand this, I would like to hear more of this, I have this particular question. Every question is legitimate. But if you put a long argumentation, it is always difficult to know which the question is. So if you can do... Now, if you think that you need an argumentation, please put it. But being aware that the longer the argumentation, the more difficult it is to discover the question. But do whatever you want to do. I mean, that is just a suggestion.
So once again, if you're not coming, if you haven't already registered for next week and you'd like to, let me know please as soon as possible. If you are coming next week, the hours are the same, 9:30 to 10 registration on Saturday, and we go through till 5, and Sunday is 9:30 through 5. Humberto, I haven't got a speech to say thank you, but...
You don't need a speech.
Thank you. And,
thank you to you.
And I'm sure these people would like to say
thank you very much.
Thank you.